Welcome to our podcast series, Conversations with Sound Artists. This is Glenn Kiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute, and this podcast is a co-production of the Dolby Institute and the SoundWorks collection, and I'm really thrilled to be back at Skywalker Ranch once again to sit down and talk with one of my friends, Gwen Whittle, or as we know her, Gwen. Gwen is a two-time Academy Award nominee for the movies Tron and Avatar. So she's really just a crazy luminary in our business. She is one of the top supervising sound editors working today. And my first question to you, Gwen, well, first of all, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to see. It feels very normal to have you here.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. You've had just an unbelievable spring and summer.
Yes.
You supervised, you did the sound supervision on both Tomorrowland and Jurassic World.
Yes.
So, first of all, thank you for checking out of the hospital to come back to talk to us. But how do you supervise two huge movies like that are happening at the same time, basically?
You have a really great crew, and they weren't supposed to be on top of each other, but schedules are slippery, and they moved. So when one moves a lot, you say to that show, like, well, you're moving a lot and you're moving on top of this other show, so I will do the best I can, but I will always have a backup for myself, but I will have to dance around these two shows. And they went, okay. So then I told the other show, this first show is moving on and I'll do the best I can, and I only missed one ADR session.
Oh, good for you.
Stuart McCowan covered it for me, so that was fine. So I always had a backup, and the mixes weren't on top of each other, so that helped.
So I'll get back into that, but I'm just curious about something you just said. So as supervising sound editor, you still cover the ADR sessions yourself?
Yeah. Oh, that's the fun part. You have to have some fun in life, right?
Because you like to hang out on the stage with the directors and the actors?
I like people.
Oh.
I like people. I like rather talk to people than sit in front of my computer like a little drone. I mean, sometimes the computer's a relief, but it's nice to watch the directors and the actors interact. It's nice to talk to people.
Yeah, I guess that was my problem. I just never really liked people
very
much.
People.
Yeah. So I don't think I've ever told you this story, but one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, and one of the reasons why I was really eager to do, we're doing this podcast series, Conversations with Sound Artists, about different aspects of sound and sound editing and sound design for movies and television and whatnot. But I don't think anybody really pays attention to dialogue editing. And I like I said, I don't think I've ever told you this story, but when I got hired to run Skywalker Sound way back in the day, I'd gotten the job, but I hadn't started yet. So it was sort of in that window period. And I was up in San Francisco trying to find a place to live. And my phone rang, and it was George Lucas's office. And they said, George would like to meet you. Can you come up to the ranch today to have lunch with George? And of course, I was like,
sure.
I'll be there. Sure, of course. So I came up, and I remember it very clearly because, weirdly, it was the opening day for episode 1. Oh. So it was May of 1999 or whatever. Right. And I remember kind of, teasing him a little bit. I mean, to the extent that you ever tease George, right. Like, wow, you actually, you showed up to work today, on opening day of your movie. That's pretty impressive. But I sat down. It was me and Gloria Borders, who was the previous general manager, and she was leaving. And so it was, the two of us sat down with George and had this lunch. And it was fast. I mean, it went on for like 2 hours. And it's just this really interesting conversation with George talking about his vision for the future of filmmaking and his plans for the company. But one of the things that I really remember very clearly about that lunch was he talked for, I want to say, like 20 or 30 minutes about dialogue editing.
K-Rose.
K-Rose,
right.
Exactly. And how important dialogue editing was to the craft of sound for film, and how nobody pays attention to it. It was. I remember him very clearly saying, dialogue editing is not sexy, so nobody talks about it, but it's the most important part of the process. And he went on and on about, like, it's important to educate people, and train dialogue editors. And to that extent, like, the next year he endowed the K-Rose professorship at USC.
Oh, that's cool.
So he really, in that sense, he kind of put his money where his mouth was. And I have to admit, I was a little embarrassed because, even at that point, I had a pretty successful career in feature film post-production. I didn't really know what dialogue editing was.
You didn't?
Well, exactly. So I had I wanted to, first of all, thank you because you taught me sort of what the craft is and what makes a good dialogue editor. But for our audience, maybe who isn't quite so familiar with that part of the process, what is dialogue editing and what does a dialogue editor do?
Dialogue editing, if it's done really well, you don't notice it. It should be completely invisible. It should not take you out of the movie. You should pay no attention to it. You take all the sound from the set, and everything's shot out of order. So they would do your close-up, and then 3 weeks later they would do my close-up. And while they were shooting your close-up, it's a corset movie, so everyone's in a corset, and there's no airplanes in corset days. So while they're shooting your take, an airplane was going over, and maybe there was a truck going beep, beep, beep behind my take. So it's kind of thing where you would take the different backgrounds from those different takes, because air changes and what's going on in the background changes all the time, and you make them smooth so you don't notice any transition. And then the backup beeps under my take, I would look for alternate takes from other like, say it's 53K take 5. You'd listen to takes 1 through 4. You'd listen to other takes that cover that shot to find the exact same words with the exact same performance to get rid of the beeps. If you can't find an alt, we go to the ADR stage. Your take was so great, your hair was great, the lighting was perfect, the acting was great, but you never did that performance again. So then you go to the ADR stage, and you have to try and recreate it. And so then when you put the ADR in, because it's in a very dead studio with no air, no nothing, you have to fill in the air behind it. So dialogue is really about keeping track of the air. It's all about you're the keeper of the but we're the air stewards.
That's a great way of putting it.
That's how we do it.
And I'm remiss because I didn't do this before, but we should absolutely listen to what you have to say about this discipline. This is just a partial list of movies that you worked on.
Okay, oh boy.
According to your IMDb page, you worked on over 120 films.
God, I'm not. I'm a little bit old, but
you're experienced.
Okay, there you go. I'm very experienced. That's right.
You cut dialogue and ADR on Terminator 2.
I did.
Panic Room, Minority Report, Iron Man, Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, Gone Girl, and my personal favorite, Catwoman.
Catwoman was you know what? It could have been a campy, wonderful thing, and they I don't know. It's an interesting little film.
Describe to me the process of cutting dialogue. Like, how does the material come to you? What do you do? What are the challenges that you typically face?
So it kind of really depends a lot on the picture department. Right now, I mean, back in the mag days, it was much. Back in the old Jurassic days of film and mag, it was much.
Isn't
easier.
it hilarious? You just referred to Jurassic as the old days.
I know. That's really funny. Well, that was a couple months ago.
Right. I presume you're talking about Jurassic Park in '93.
Yes, a long time ago. Yeah. So we get all the production from the picture department, everything that was shot on the set, and then the assistants do. They do this magic where they take this track that is usually the picture editor cuts with a mix track, which all the different mics that they use on the set mix down to one, and then the assistants take that and they spread it apart so that each mic has its own track. So
I'm gonna stop you right there because I want to clarify. So on the set,
right.
The production sound mixer is recording anywhere from one microphone to
up to 8 usually, sometimes more, but each actor will normally have a lav mic. If they're really wonderful, and we hope they are wonderful, there's at least 1 or 2 booms because boom mics sound so much nicer than lavs.
So you would prefer to use the input from a boom mic than from a
if it's on mic enough and there's not a ton of extra sort of background noise.
But obviously, if it's a long distance shot, you're not going to have a boom in that. So then you have to use probably a radio mic,
which is the same as the lav. Yeah. So you get all those mics split out, and it's all in sync, and it matches the cuts that the picture editor did, and then you start.
Well, but even before we get to that, so the production sound mixer's got these 8, maybe up to 8 microphones, or maybe even more.
Right.
So he or she will do actually a mix on the set, right? So they'll mix those 8 tracks or however many down to usually to 1, to a mono.
And that's what the picture editor works with.
We'll cut to.
Right. So they usually work on an Avid. I don't know if Final Cut Pro, but Avid you can have 24 tracks, I think. So they usually have 1 track of their production, and then they fill in their effects and their music and all that kind of stuff. And it all has to fit into 24 tracks.
Right.
So if you use all the split out mics, you're using up all your track space with the production mics. So that's why they just use the one.
And how often is it? I mean, obviously, production sound mixing is an art.
Yes.
Unto itself.
Yeah.
How often is it the case that you can kind of just that sounds great and you can kind of just use the mixer's production track, and then
how often?
I mean, I don't want to say it's
right.
It's all the time, because then you would be out of a job, right?
Well, you still have to get rid of the lip smacks, but it really depends how often.
Depends on the conditions, if they were on stage.
It depends on if you're in a big special effects movie and there's fans going all the time, or they're using an IMAX camera, then the production mixers
those tracks are
kind of is what it is. So you're sort of kind of stuck there. Really good production mixers, sometimes you use the mix mic because it sounds great. Mm-hmm. But they're really tied to, they have a hard job.
They sure do.
So I really applaud anyone who makes any reasonable sound come out, that gets turned over at all.
How difficult is it? Because then typically by the time the movie gets to you, the director and the editor have been working on the movie, editing it for months and months and months. They're really used to that
they
production
get the guide
mix
track. Yeah.
Right? That guide track. How difficult is it to then introduce new elements?
Well, usually when we clean it up, when we go down to individual mics, all of a sudden it's so much cleaner and pretty, like, oh, that sounds so much better. Oh, I like it so much more. Oh, where did all that noise is gone? Sometimes I'm like, oh, where's the noise? Let's go back. So it kind of depends on the director, depends on the person. Some people love mono, they just want their guide track and nothing else. Some people are like, oh, please get rid of that. Oh, thank God that background's gone, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it depends. Each director is different. They all have personalities. Each mixer is different. Each mixer, we try and cut to the mixer's taste as much as yeah, totally. Tom Johnson likes it one way, Laura likes it one way.
So typically you will know who's going to mix the dialogue
usually
when you're editing it. So that changes. I had no idea that changed your approach.
Yeah. Well, we asked them too, how do you want it? And if they think, well, I'd like it this way, I like all my air split off, I'd be able to keep it all together. I mean,
now, do you change it in terms of track layout, or would you actually cut in a different way?
Track layout.
Okay.
Yeah. Because cutting is kind of cutting. Well, no, yeah, it's cutting.
So the production tracks come in and you split out everything so that you're hearing the feeds from each individual microphone. And then I presume there's a big part of that, first part of that job is listening.
Yes. And you listen through to each mic and decide, okay, this one's better, this one's better. Okay, maybe you can't decide. You have the boom and the lav. Then you cut both, you mute one, and then because if you're in the mix, sometimes the mixer will say, well, it sounds kind of thin. You have a boom for that. Boom, you got it, kind of thing. So you cut. You try and thin it out as much as possible. You don't want to cut everything while you're going through. So you sort of organize your takes. You organize which tracks you want to use, and at the same time, I spot the ADR. For instance, if you can't find, or there's just you can't find an alt for the backup beeps behind the thing, or there's just a scene that's got crazy wind machines on it, or there's some sort of harness creak because it's a special effects thing, and you gotta do that. So you spot the ADR then, and what's your approach to spotting ADR? Do you kind of overspot? Do you sort of like, do you initially sort of try to grab anything that might be problematic, or are you making some decisions as you go through? Like, I can probably get away with this. If there's something like a backup beat behind someone's voice, I try to find that alt right away. It's like, oh, I can fix that. Unless there's a terrible time crunch and an actor has to come in, like we need him tomorrow, then I'll just spot and probably overspot because I don't have time to look for stuff. In a perfect world, this would never happen in 100 years, but if you could premix before you shot the ADR, your ADR line can go way down. A lot of it is kind of covering your butt.
Well, you say that, but I remember a really interesting example on a movie that you did, Tron.
Yes.
Which was, and this happened when I was running Skywalker, and they got about, I want to say, a day or two into production. As I remember, they were shooting up in Canada. They got a day or two into production. I got a frantic phone call from the producer. And he said, we just realized that these suits,
that's right.
the LED lights
that's
on
right.
the suits have a hum.
Right.
And I said, "Oh, what do you mean? Like you're getting like radio interference? Like
No,
they
sang
when you when you're listening back to the dailies, you can hear a hum." And he's like, "No, like standing next to them on the set, they're singing these lights,
and they would change depending on how close they were to one another."
It wasn't, and it wasn't, and every time it wasn't a constant steady tone. Anytime somebody would move, you'd get a Doppler shift,
and it would change tones. I forgot about that.
And so he called me up and said, "So we can save this in post, right?"
And you know what? We did.
And so in that sense, I remember very clearly, I called you up, I called you in because we knew that you were going to be working on the movie, and we had them send down some tracks from the first couple of days, and we went on to, I want to say we went with Michael Szymanczyk into one of the stages here.
Right.
And
we tested it. Right.
And we tested it. And we decided that, we could probably...
We actually hired somebody who used this process. We hired Marie Ebbing to do... what's the name of that thing? She said she was massively pregnant. She sat with headphones on. She I can't remember what she used, but she basically surgically followed the track of that sound and got it out. And
she did it by hand.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So but in that sense, I remember that was a really specific sort of thing.
True.
Where, and we would get those calls occasionally that a producer would say, "We've got this really specific issue. Can you take a listen to this before, even before we finish shooting? Do you think we can save this?"
So we have done that. It's true, but it's rare to do it for a whole movie.
Yeah.
But there was also a scene in Tron where they're coming. The two Jeff Bridges are coming at each other. Wind machines everywhere. They knew that there was no hope, so we knew that we went in and we just went in ADR'd that scene. Another scene that there was no hope for was actually another Joe Kosinski film, was Oblivion, the scene by the Empire State Building. They shot it in Iceland, and they happened to shoot it in the one time of the year in Iceland where it's black fly season. And the black flies covered everything. They covered the camera. They went in people's eyes and ears. I mean, they had to have these fans going
to blow the flies
otherwise
out.
The camera wouldn't work. So we did that. We ADR'd that scene very, very early on because there was no way to use it.
Well, so you tend to work on, I know that you also work on independent films as well as big budget Hollywood studio blockbusters. I mean, obviously the action movies that you work on, you're expecting that you're going to have a certain amount of ADR because there's going to be wind machines, there's going to be effects things on set that have to be they're just going to obliterate the dialogue. But one of the things that was really intriguing to me about Coming to Skywalker was I remember having a conversation with Laura Hirschberg at one point. And she said, the dirty little secret of these big, huge, complicated comic book and action movies is, from a dialogue perspective, sometimes those are the easiest because,
large stretches of nothing.
Well, or you've got big sound effects and you can cover stuff up. But she pointed out to me that if it's a little low budget independent dialogue walkie-talkie movie, that's often the hardest.
They're a lot harder because you don't have the latitude for all that ADR to fix it. You have to fix it in your tracks, and usually there's a lot more talking. Sometimes it's because they're low budgets or their situations are they just don't have as much. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's not true because they don't have as much money. Their sets and stuff are more contained. But maybe that's, I don't know.
Well, but they're also having to shoot a lot faster.
Right.
They often don't have the best conditions for capturing sound.
Right. But they're also more fun. They're more of a challenge. Actually, I really love low budget films.
Why is that?
Because they usually talk more in them, which is true.
Everybody hates ADR.
That's not true.
This is why I wanted to ask the question. There's a general rule, like you talked. I mean, I've never talked to a director who has said, "Oh, I like going to the ADR stage."
David Fincher loves ADR.
Well, there you go.
David Fincher loves ADR.
That's the soundbite.
Okay,
from this interview.
Maybe he doesn't love ADR, but he's not afraid of it. Jim Cameron is not afraid of it. ADR is a tool like anything else. It's like having a camera. It's like having a dolly. It's like ADR is a really, really powerful tool, and if you're not afraid to use it, it can really, really, really help it can elevate your film because it takes away the things that are distracting you from what's going on.
So let's talk about this. So I think most people, maybe who don't know any better, automatically think that ADR is something to be avoided and it's a total evil. So what are the positive things that can come out of ADR?
Meryl Streep would say, who loves ADR, it's another.
Really? Are you serious?
She loves ADR because it's another chance at her performance. So she's not afraid to go in and try it and put a different color on it. It's another. I mean, you got the performance once on the set, a couple times, all these takes. It's just another crack at it. It's another way of approaching it. You can fix a lot of things. You can change lines. You can add a different twist to something. You can really change, even by adding a breath to something. You can change a performance. People sort of underestimate the value of breathing. I mean, dialogue editing is much about taking care of the breath as it is about the air. Because you can have a sad, and then they're both exhales, right? But one's really happy, one's really sad. So you can add that sort of stuff in. Loop group that's sort of the bane of a lot of people's existence too. But if you don't have it, you really miss it. Same thing with Foley. If you don't hear the sound of the Foley, loop group is like word Foley,
right,
kind of thing.
The presence of it just builds to a believable atmosphere.
Right.
So does David Fincher do as many ADR takes as he does picture takes during the shoot?
Yes, he does. He does indeed. He's not afraid to go and go and go and go and go until he hears what he wants, and he will frequently take a word from take 19 and a syllable from take 53 and a syllable from take 105 and put it together, and there's his performance.
And he can remember that.
Well, I mean, it helps that we take notes.
Tell me about, tell me a little bit about how does the ADR stage work and what are you doing there?
It's different with every director. A lot of directors don't show up if it's just for technical reasons and they want to just get the exact same performance. They trust you to sort of help the actor get back to where they needed to go. And you listen to the guide track, you listen to the new performance, you go back and forth to get as close as you can.
Now, I'm going to pause you for a second there because this is for public consumption, so no names, of course. But we have both worked with a couple of very prominent directors who just refuse to show up on the ADR stage, much to the anger of their actors.
Right. If
And is that because they just feel like you're going in there to correct technical issues?
Right.
This is not about performance, so I don't need to be there.
Right. Which is usually, if they're not there, that's what I say to the actor. I say, they're really sorry they can't be here. They love your performance. This is what we want to get back to. It's got this backup beat behind it, and you're in a corset movie and there's no backup beat. I mean, that kind of, sorry to keep using the same thing over and over, but it's kind of really easy way to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And you just go, you keep going with it. Sometimes I'd never do as many takes as David Fincher does, but I'll keep going until they sound, you can't hear the difference other than the lack of background kind of thing. If the director is there, obviously they run the show and I just take notes about sync and I let them do performance stuff. If they're not there, it's my job to help them get back to where they were.
So you're helping the actors?
I hope so. I hope I'm helping them instead of.
It's an interesting kind of how do you direct Brad Pitt or Tom Hanks on the ADR stage?
Well, usually, it depends.
Because you've worked with both of them, right?
Yes. Yeah. I haven't worked with Tom Hanks. Brad Pitt's wonderful. You just want to go have a beer with him, have him meet your mom, and he's just he's a great guy. He really is.
Are some actors better at ADR than others?
Yes. People who are musicians.
I won't ask you who's the worst, but who's the best?
Matt Damon is a freak of nature with it. Tom Cruise is really, 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 really good.
Really?
Meryl Streep is really good. Usually if they have a musical ear, they can hear the rhythm and the tone of their voice. If they can hear themselves, it really helps. If they can't hear themselves, it's going to be a long day.
What do you mean if they can't hear themselves?
If they can't hear the musicality in their line, if they can't hear, for instance, if they say the words, I love you, they can't hear the I love you. They can I love you. It's like if they can't hear their original performance, they think they can't hear it back.
And that's a combination of breath and sound and everything that's happening in the vocal cavity. And all that
there's a musicality to everything you say. Even you interviewing me, you have a particular cadence, you have a particular timbre in your voice.
Annoying as it is.
No, it's lovely. It's very soothing. Mine's probably more annoying because anyway, but. So they have to be able to hear themselves, and that's people who can hear themselves you're going to be fine. It's great.
My experience has been musicians and comedians. are really good at it.
Comedians are sometimes really bad at it because they never do the same performance twice.
Oh, see, my experience had been they really understand timing.
But they can get the sync, but the performance is always different.
Interesting.
That's my experience with comics. Musicians really, really, really good because they hear the musicality and the rhythm.
Right.
I mean, but everyone's different too.
How important is it on the ADR stage for them to nail the sync, to get it, right in as it was originally?
I mean, every editor sort of knows what they can fix and what they can't fix. So there is some wiggle room to it. If the line has a lot of S's and F's and bravo, they're easier to cut. If it's got a lot of hard plosive B's, T's, things that really have to hit hard, that are hard, or vowels, those are much harder to cut. So if it's a lot of S-Y, I love S's and F's. They're my favorite letters because you can shorten and lengthen them so much.
I think that's going to be the soundbite for this interview. I love S's and F's.
They're the most versatile letters.
So you're cutting on the stage when you're recording ADR?
No. No. Sometimes the recordist, if there's a recordist on the stage, or a lot of times now, a lot of the mixers, if there's no recordist, they're pretty good. It's all Pro Tools are pretty good at least getting it close. But so when the actor says the line, I'm listening to the guide track in one ear and the other through a headphone.
Oh my God, that would make me crazy.
No, you have to. That's how you call things. So you look at it on screen, you listen to the original performance. It's also how you can tell if it's close to me. And then you have one ear free, so you hear them. They say the line, you're like, oh, okay, I think it's close enough that I can. So you got
a pair of headphones and you're just listening. You have one can on one ear, and then you're listening to them. You're in the room with them.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have you had to train your brain to do that? Is that?
I don't.
Just come second nature now.
I don't know. I can't. Some actors, particularly Australian actors, they like to do this thing where they hear the line and then they repeat it 3 times. And that's really hard for me because I can't tell if it's in sync.
Right.
It's like, so then the mixer, the ADR mixer or the recordist will have to then line it up.
Meaning they don't do it to picture.
Right. So they hear the line, Glenn, you're great. Glenn, you're great. Glenn, you're great. Glenn, you're great. And then they'll take one of those takes.
Interesting.
But that's always harder for me. But it's not about me. It's about the actor. Whatever makes the actor happy. So they're comfortable. I'm comfortable.
How do you? I can imagine that ADR must be especially tough for young actors and for
some kids are crazy good at it.
Okay, well I don't know anything then.
Some kids, they're like adults. Some kids are just preternaturally, they hear it. The little girl, she's not a little girl anymore, but the young teen in Tomorrowland, fantastic. Huh. She heard herself. She could do different colors to different performances. She was great.
How often do you end up changing performance in ADR?
That's up to the director.
Right.
I mean, I try. If it's just me, I try not to. I try and make it so that no one notices. So they're never tweaked on the mixed stage. Like, oh, was that ADR? I was like, oh, that's different. I try and make it so that it sits right in. But if the director wants to change, obviously, that's their things. Happens at least once or twice every film. I would think they want to change a little something. I think. I notice I'm getting very S-y myself after I talk about those S's.
There's nothing like talking about dialogue in ADR that'll make you paranoid about that.
Right. The other, Cheryl Nardi is actually the queen of the dialogue cheat. It's the kind of thing where you can, I mean, even if it's something as small as you can take, two people are talking and a line gets overlapped, but in the cut they get pulled apart. So the end of the word, the end of my S's and F's, or their T's, they get dropped. You can take a T from another word and put it on, and no one will notice. All of a sudden, instead of saying, sometimes, like, if the word is I hate you. So someone's like, I hate you. So you can take the T from something else and make it I hate you. And you can steal from all sorts of... In a little bit, it's kind of like changing dimensions, because you can take something that was recorded all in one thing, and you can take a T or an S or a breath or air from that was recorded, hours, days, months afterwards, and you can move it before you can move it to a place from earlier. You can change dimensions with time because you're moving all these recordings around. It's actually kind of, it's like weird dialogue relativity. When I was tired of making air loops for ADR, I'd think about that. So I'm just changing dimensions here.
What is an air loop for ADR?
So when you you have a production scene and you're standing in a field and there's birds and cows mooing and wind going and it's beautiful and everything, but the plane shows up and you can't have the plane. So you take that line out.
So maybe it might just be one line that you need to replace, not the whole scene.
Right. Or even a word or something like that. Sometimes you use as little as you can. You try and keep as much of the original production. If you take it out, the birds and the cows and the wind all disappears.
Also disappear,
so you have to make fill. We call it fill. It's the air, again, keeper of the air, to make it seem like everything's in the same place at the same time. So you make a loop, because sometimes it's always very short, so it just keeps repeating itself. And you make a little patch for where you took the line out, and then the ADR sits right in perfectly. It's like it never happened. There was no airplane. Your performance is great. It's beautiful. Director doesn't notice.
That's the best part.
Right.
Do you get involved in, in miking? I can imagine, and that's a huge challenge with ADR to try to match, because obviously, on an ADR stage you have access to beautiful, rich, pristine, microphones that they don't actually shoot with on a set.
Right. It's actually kind of funny. When we were working on Munich, we went to Tel Aviv. A lot of the actors were Israeli, so they sent us to Tel Aviv. And in Tel Aviv, they do a lot of foreign versions. So they take the English version, they make it Hebrew or whatever it is, and it's all re-recorded with beautiful mics and everything. And the guy we were working with said, "Why are you using these mics? I can give you this beautiful recording." And I explained, I said, "Well, if you all of a sudden have a production with kind of a funky radio mic, and all of a sudden it's a beautiful mic, you're going to know it's going to stick out. It's like, whoa, where'd they come from?" So we try always to match the mics that they use in production, the same kind of radio mic, the same kind of booms.
So you actually will find out from the production mixer what
absolutely.
the kind of microphone that they use.
And which ones they use for what situation.
How far away they were.
Right. And I'll usually record at least 3 mics, 2 booms, and a lav. So that if they...
On an ADR stage?
Always.
2 booms and a lav?
Right. So they always have the lav on, so in case... Because I don't always know what we're going to end up using in the mix.
Right.
So
boom mics on a stand, or do you actually...
No.
Will you ever have a boom operator on an ADR stage?
If you have the budget to do that, it's really nice, but I normally don't.
Well, that was a trick that I don't know, Andy Monsheen, who's a well-known picture editor. Very early on in my career, I worked with him, and that was his. He felt like that was his secret to getting good performance as an ADR, was to not tie the actor down to a stationary microphone and a music stand where the script is. Hire a boom operator, have them on.
If you can do that, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing. That works really well. It looks ridiculous, but if you tape the lav to like a sweatband on their head, it keeps it from getting clothing-wise, and they can move really freely. So even if the booms don't get it, you'll always get it here, kind of like on a set.
I want to see a picture of Meryl Streep
wearing a little sweatband. It's like very 80s tennis.
What did you work with Meryl Streep on?
She was in Lions for Lambs.
Lions for Lambs. That's right.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that dialogue editing for an animated film is completely different.
Mm-hmm. Everything's beautiful.
Right, because it's all pristinely recorded on a stage.
Right. It's kind of like doing a foreign version in English.
The movie's 100% ADR in that sense.
Right, so it's beautiful. So that's really more about, that truly is all about performance and breathing and keeping them alive and, and taking care of lip smacks.
And I remember, one of the first pictures that I worked with you on as a supervisor was the Simpsons movie. Okay. And we thought that Pixar made a lot of changes to their movies. We had never experienced anything.
That was insane.
But those guys came from a television background where they were used to changing everything.
Fast.
That we had never experienced anything like that before. So
they did temps every 3 weeks on 2 stages. It was crazy. It was insane.
So so in that sense, you were actually doing a lot of ADR on an animated film because they were making so many changes to animation that was already right. They couldn't go back to wherever they do their animation and reanimate it.
Right.
So.
But actually, they did. That animation's so simple compared to like a Pixar show. It's so simple they could change it on a dime.
Right.
So because it's not. It's line drawings, pretty line drawings, but it's not like Ratatouille.
Right.
With all sorts of depth to it and everything. It's a much more simpler thing. So, they changed like the wind, the jokes. I mean, they just kept rewriting.
If a joke didn't land, it was out.
Yeah. Very quickly. And it was kind of fascinating. But that was an intense show because the changes happened so fast.
Yeah. What are you working on now?
I'm working on the Peanuts movie.
Oh, how fun.
Beautiful animation. So I got to go up in Charles Schultz's son's biplane. I had the recorder strapped to my leg so it wouldn't fall out, and he did loops and he did spins. It was fantastic.
So for what? This was to get...
We were recording the biplane because there's the biplanes in the movie. The Sop with Camel and all that stuff.
Sop with Camel, right?
And all the effects guys were really mad because I got to go up in the plane and they didn't. That was really fun.
Well, so you just grabbed that job for yourself.
I actually did. I said, I'm going to go that day. I'm going to go do this with you.
So what's the balance? Are you mostly supervising now, or will you also do some?
I do anything. I love ADR. I love dialogue. I like doing both. I like supervising. If you have a job you want me to do, I'll do it.
And you love working with Spielberg and with David Fincher. Yeah.
Brad Bird is great to work with. Joe Kosinski's great to work with. Blue Sky people, wonderful,
Such nice people.
Yeah. Really great. I've been really lucky. Cameron's, he's always been really nice to me. I mean, he's kind of a genius.
All right, so let's just talk about that. What's it like working with Jim Cameron, and how does he run an ADR stage?
He's not always there. He's actually pretty sane on an ADR stage. I mean, he really likes his actors. The actors really like him. They're really respectful to one another. So he understands why you're doing it for technical reasons. For instance, on Avatar, the whole set was plywood. Right. They're running around in plywood. Pandora's not made of plywood. So, you sort of have to choose whether you're boom, 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 boom under the line, or you want him to walk on soft, squishy moss kind of thing. So he also understands. There's a scene where Jake's being chased by the, of course, now I'm going to forget the name of the creature, the bad black wolf things. That's terrible that I can't remember their names.
I don't remember it either. The big black wolf things, sure.
The dire wolves. No, that's a dire horse. Well, don't let him listen to this. He's going to fire me. Oh, God. Anyway, he's being chased by this creature through the woods. The music's going, the effects are going, he's running by the bushes and everything, and the Foley's going. And he kept saying, I'm losing track of my character. We have to hear him breathing. You have to make sure you keep track of your character. You don't have to hear every breath, but you have to know where your character is. You have to follow their path.
Interesting.
And I learned so much from that. I was like, that's absolutely right. Because if it's all the music, then you lose track of why you're even watching the shot.
Right. Yeah, I remember that for the first time I saw the layer demo for Saving Private Ryan. For that the first layer of the demo was Tom Hanks breathing. And it's huge. Yeah. Because it keeps you with him. It makes you follow him. I think breathing has to be mixed properly. Sure. I shouldn't name names. There are a couple, I didn't work on them, but and I'm a big fan of breathing in movies and stuff, but if it's too prominent, it's weird. Pulls you out. Right. So yeah. And Mission Impossible, the whole scene where Tom Cruise is running through the dust storm. Mm-hmm. He borrowed my scarf and he just did the whole thing. And you don't hear everything, but again, you keep track of where he is in that whole thing. Did you ever wash that scarf again? I gave it back to my daughter. It was her scarf, actually. And she cherishes that scarf now. Has the you've been cutting dialogue for a long time. And obviously from pre-digital through the transition. How has the craft? Let me ask you this. I think it's pretty obvious to understand how the craft has changed because the tools have changed. But has the art of dialogue editing changed? Has the aesthetic changed over the course of your career? The aesthetic has not, but the ability to do a better job has. I mean, there's certain things I miss about MAG. You had time to think between rewinds. My arms were in much better shape, and although they're not too bad now. But the fact that you can get sub-perf and you can really kind of... The tools are much finer. Yeah, which is kind of nice. It's kind of like using a coarse sieve versus a fine sieve kind of thing. Sure. But the end result is still the same. You still want things to be smooth. You want things to not pull you out of the film. If a person has a huge lip smack in the middle of the line, that's going to go, oh, well, what was that? You want to take it out. You want to add the breathing when you see them huffing and puffing and the production didn't pick it up, or there's too much, else going on. You want to make sure that you make your characters believable with what the production you're given, and then if you don't have it, you spice it up with ADR or loop group. Right. So, I mean, basically, dialogue is the queen of the track. If you don't understand the dialogue or you can't follow the story,
why are you telling it? So you have to make sure that that sits prominently in your track, and you want it to be pretty. Because music is huge, obviously, and effects, impossible without it. But if you don't hear the dialogue, you don't have a story.
So I think a lot of people, especially, younger independent filmmakers, first timers, or even people outside the industry, sort of think, okay, well, the three elements to my soundtrack are my production track, and then I take my production track and I layer some sound effects in it and put some music in that, and bam, that's what we do. So you've talked really eloquently about the process of sound editorial, but then there's also the dialogue editorial, but there's also the dialogue mix. So you prepped all your tracks, then you come onto a mixing stage and you work with a dialogue mixer, and what happens during that part of the process?
I actually really love working with a mixer because it's a person who gives a whole different set of ears to something that you've been just minutely obsessing over. Every single cut, where you've made your alts, where you've done your cheats, where sort of all your little bones are buried. And then the mixer comes in, and first of all, you see if they notice any of those things, and if they jump out to them, then you can try and fix them. They take the backgrounds, all the sort of the air, and they make that air even better. They take out they EQ the air. They make it probably less annoying than what I've been listening to. They have much finer, or they also have the time to. The premix is when you take the time to really finesse the overall sound of the track versus the minutia, which is when editing is where you take care of all the nitty-gritty stuff that you don't want to take time on the mix stage for. And if you're lucky, you can mix it against the effects ambiances so you know how far you have to take things. So, for instance, in Tomorrowland, the actual place, what does Tomorrowland sound like?
Right.
There are definitely it could be, if they'd wanted to ADR the whole thing, it could have been pin quiet. But they didn't really want to do that. They didn't really need to because of the choices that they made. So with the help of the effects ambiances, we knew how far we had to clean up the production without thinning out the voices too much. I mean, you clean it up as much as you can without making someone sound pinched or too thin. So if you take out too much of the subs, you have to make sure you don't squash the voice too much. It's all about taking care of the voice and making them sound natural, which sometimes is harder than you think.
Of course. Well, I think, there's so much pressure on budgets.
Right.
And especially when you're dealing with a low-budget independent film.
Right.
I think, unfortunately, there's a bit of an expectation.
Editors are doing more and more and more of it.
More and more of those mixing functions are being pushed back into editorial. And certainly I've had conversations with producers. They're especially on low budget independent films, their expectation is that the dialogue is going to show up on the mixing stage, and they can set the faders at 0 and that's done.
Right.
We're going to focus on effects and music. How have you dealt with more of those mixing functions being pushed back into editorial? I presume that's less the case on a bigger budget film.
Right. It's just you sort of change your workflow a little bit. Well, you change it a lot, and you deal more with noise management than sort of alternate takes and taking care of sort of that kind of the nice, precise stuff that I actually really love to do. It's more about noise management and denoising and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's some pretty powerful tools out there which are great.
Mm-hmm. Software tools to help clean up dialogue.
Yeah, there's the Oxford stuff. There's the Cedar plugins. There's the RX stuff. But it's a different way of using your time. Those things take time, and it's really easy to go too far.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's old school of me. I love working with a mixer on that kind of stuff, just because they're better at it than I am. Maybe some of the newer, younger hot shots are, feel more comfortable with it. If I ever do any noise reduction stuff, I always keep the original just in case. It's so easy to go too far. So just in case somebody says, what the heck did you do there? I was like, oh, here's the original. And they can sort of do a prettier version. I always keep my bases covered. It's like, that sucked. Here's a better one. Or let's start again kind of thing. Because if you tie yourself into what someone else might think sucks, then you're wasting time.
Right.
So
Any particular challenges or horror stories crop to mind?
Oh, there's so many, but I don't want to name names. I don't want to.
You can tell stories without naming names.
Horror stories. Most of them are pretty good, to be honest with you. Most of, I've been really lucky. I really have. I've worked with great people. There is one particular, but most of the horror stories come from ADR. There's one time we did it at the ranch, and at that time the ADR was done the Foley stage, and there was only one stairway in and out. So there's only one way in and out, and the director and the actor got into a large argument about the direction of the end of the film. And the actor had one version and the director had another version. They were standing on the stairs screaming at each other, and they were crying in tears, and I was stuck in the room. I was like, okay, what do I do? Do I look at I started looking at Foley shoes. I couldn't get out of there. And the picture editor was watching through the screen just laughing because they were just, that was a very uncomfortable situation.
People get high-strung in this business.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's a lot riding on it. And they're very creative people. They're,
there's also sort of, I feel like in sound post-production, it's sort of the moment of truth.
You got to birth the baby.
There are no more opportunities for a miracle to happen to save your film.
That's true. This is post. You have to fix it now.
Exactly. Any other final thoughts?
I hope you never hear my work. I hope it's always invisible. How about that?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, Gwen, thank you so much.
This was really nice.
For taking the time to talk to us today.
I didn't have too many lip smacks.
Michael will clean it all up.
Okay, sorry.
This has been the Conversations with Sound Artists, talking with Gwen Whittle at Skywalker Sound. This is Glenn Kiser from the Dolby Institute and the SoundWorks Collection. And thanks for listening.